Hey there, welcome to another review episode of Waiting in the Sky with TJ Starman. And today I am going to be breaking down the latest movie to hit the screen from Marvel. Very important distinction here. This is Sony's Marvelverse, and it's Morbius. So, a little bit of background about the character in case you were not familiar for whatever reason. Morbius is a Spider-Man side character, was originally was known as a member of Spider-Man's rogues gallery of sorts. Has been kind of an anti-hero at times in the comics. I know that he made kind of a lasting impression in the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s. So if that was your jam, that you may know Morbius from his run on that show. And if you do, more power to you. But for a lot of folks, Morbius was a brand new name. But people were bought into it because it's Marvel, because it's connected to Spider-Man. And then Sony went ahead and attached Jared Leto to play the character as well. So definitely had a lot going for it as far as just the marketing and the buildup and the hype. However, if you're listening to this, even on Monday after the release weekend of this movie, you'll know by now that there's not been great reception to this movie. So I originally wanted to kind of give my non-spoiler take and then shift into spoilers. However, I don't know that my non-spoiler take is very substantial. So I'm going to pretty much just spoil the thing from the beginning here. So I'm going to give you that as a fair warning. So from this point on, through the entire episode, spoilers are on the table. If you don't want to be spoiled about this movie, hit pause, go check it out, and then come back once you have watched it, because you might want to hear the rest of this, even if it's just to have someone who shares similar feelings to what you are experiencing at that time. So let's dive into it. So Morbius is a vampire, and that is the simplest take. Morbius is a vampire. Morbius, quote unquote, the living vampire, is his title. And so it's interesting because this movie follows Jared Leto's character, Michael Morbius, who is a doctor. It starts off and it's showing his struggle with a rare blood disorder. And he is being raised in what appears to be an orphanage, a care home for young children that struggle with or that have this blood disorder. And I think they try to establish that, people are coming and going. And so Michael is just calling people Milo just as like a placeholder name, so he doesn't have to learn people's names or something like that. They try and set that up early on while he's a child. The other thing that they set up early on is that kids are viciously cruel, and they are just hammering away at these kids that are obviously have this health disorder, and it's just terrible. Like they're bullying them, they're making fun of them because they are walking with crutches and things like that, and it's terrible. I hated watching that setup. It's not entirely unrealistic, but it was pretty heavy-handed, and so it's not enjoyable. But it does kind of establish not only Michael's drive to cure his disease for himself and for others, but also establishes the relationship between him and I guess I'm just going to call the other character Milo, who is a friend of his that he makes when they're children, and then kind of grows up alongside him. But we really don't see a lot of the middle ground between when they're children and when Michael is a full-fledged doctor trying to cure this disease. So that's what we get from the opening setup there. It's just kind of a weird relationship between them, though. Like, I don't know it because they're clearly friends, but there's maybe a little bit of a rivalry that's kind of under the surface, and I think they tried to set that up as a way of establishing Milo as the villain or the antagonist early on, or to hint at it. It just comes across weird. And I should mention that Milo as an adult is played by Matt Smith, famously one of the doctors in Doctor Who. I don't watch that show, so I couldn't tell you which one, but a recent one. And honestly, before this movie, I had never even heard him talk. So I didn't know what his voice sounded like, and so that was kind of an experience for me when he first spoke in this movie. Another key thing that they establish early on in the movie is that this actually takes place in the Venom universe. So the Tom Hardy Venom universe, they make mention of the stuff that went down in San Francisco. And so it's unclear necessarily whether they're referring to the events of Venom or of Venom Let There Be Carnage. Either way, crazy stuff did happen in San Francisco, and they kind of established that, which is a question a lot of people had coming into it because of the way that the Spider-Man universes, multiverse, have collided not only in Into the Spider-Verse, but also most recently in No Way Home. So there was some questions about what universe this takes place in, what other characters might show up. Um, there's really no other characters from other universes that show up. Even though it's in the Venom universe, we don't see anyone from those movies make an appearance or a cameo even. So it's just, it loses a lot of that connective tissue that a lot of people are yearning for right now. And I won't blame the movie for that, because I do think that if the movie was really good, it would be able to stand on its own. And so I think that's what they kind of wanted to go for here. So I can't blame the director, the studio for not forking up a bunch of cash to get, like, you know, a Tom Hardy cameo in there or something like that. It makes sense business wise. But anyway, it's hard because I just, my struggles with this movie is it's full of tropes. It's kind of a generic story, and it doesn't really elevate that at all. So you get the science gone wrong trope with the way that this character gets his abilities. And so I mentioned Michael is obviously trying to cure his disease. So he has been researching vampire bats, and they have, I guess, some sort of chemical in their saliva that allows them to break down blood, and to be able to ingest that into their body. And so that's what he is keyed in on. He wants to isolate that chemical or that ability and be able to integrate that into a human being. So he's been doing that research brings a bunch of vampire bats home from, I forget exactly where it was he was at in the beginning. And then another trope that they do, they have, I understand that people in science, they run tests on mice. But this is something that they show in this movie, and it's just, it's tough to watch this. Like, when all these movies, they show the mice like being tortured essentially by having this chemical injected into them. So it's really hard. And that was just a thought that I had in the theater watching this, was how many movies do this, show this, and it's tough to see sometimes. Um, and so ultimately, this test, they come to the conclusion that the test is ready for human testing. So he obviously is going to test it on himself. It goes either really right or really wrong, a little of both maybe, um, because it does give him the ability to strengthen his body to superhuman levels, which I think he was just looking for normal human levels, but it does go beyond that. The issue is that it does require him to feed on blood, making him a vampire. And so when he does not get enough blood, he kind of reverts into just this super demonic vampire type form, that fully takes over him and is just ready to feed. So conveniently, to establish that he is a good guy, he is an inventor of some sort of artificial blood that he primarily uses as his sustenance after this point. Of course, he does attack a bunch of, I don't know, mercenaries, or just, they seemed like bad guys, but they are killed by Morbius in his pure vampiric form early on. And at this point, I just want to say the vampire thing, it's hard to go beyond that, because at this point in time in pop culture, vampires are just so cheesy. You can blame Twilight if you want, but and all of the kind of melodrama TV shows about vampires, but they're played out, and like, you can't really take them seriously. And so that was a struggle I think this movie had from the beginning, which was kind of, it's curious that they decided to go with this character over a plethora of other Spider-Man characters that myself as well as Benjamin and Isaac talked about in the last main episode of the show. But they went with Morbius, and they are like, we're gonna hinge this success on this vampire idea, and it doesn't really ever work for me throughout the entire runtime of the film. So I'm just gonna get that out of the way. The vampire thing in general doesn't work for me. It's just really like there's a lot of cringy lines too. Like he at one point gets arrested and he's sitting there with the cops, and he can tell that he is starting to get those stronger cravings for blood. He needs blood to sustain himself. And he tells them, he says, I'm getting hungry. You don't want to see me when I'm hungry. And it's, I guess they're trying to do a nod to the Hulk here, which is weird, but it doesn't work whatsoever. There's also just like I'm just running through my notes here, and it's a little bit scattered, but it kind of goes with the way that the movie flows. Another weird thing that I had with this is his abilities allow him to move very quickly, like essentially bullet time. But along with that, you get this kind of smoky effect around him. So it's just kind of like this power or whatever is emanating from him, which is fine if you want to do that. I would imagine if it was like, black gray kind of smoke, like I just mentioned, that would be very dark, vampiric. Like I would get that. But the colors of the smokiness around him are the colors of whatever clothing he's wearing. So it, I don't know what's happening. Are these clothes evaporating when he's moving, or what? Because he's wearing like his orange prison jumpsuit, and all of a sudden it's orange smoke that's flying off of him. So it's whatever. It's not a speed blur because it's emanating from him and is kind of flowing. So it's not like in the Flash when he's wearing, it's just a red streak because he's wearing his red outfit. No, this is entirely different, and it doesn't make any sense. One of my little weird nitpicks there. Another thing is they really telegraph the mirror match trope that in so many superhero movies, and it didn't always upset me, but because it is still happening, really upsets me now. So we knew that his best friend Milo, who has the same disorder that he does, is obviously then going to inject himself with this quote unquote cure. And so it was just forecasted from the very beginning, and the villain and hero have the same abilities, which we have seen this, going back to Iron Man, all of those. It's just in every pretty much Marvel movie, and it doesn't work. I like the creativity of having a protagonist and antagonist with different abilities going after each other. It makes it a lot more interesting and entertaining, especially because Sony, with their Marvel universe, they just did this mirror match thing both Venom movies. So why would you continue to do this in this Morbius movie? Terrible, 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 terrible. There is one fight sequence when Milo and Michael fight, and Matt Smith, he headbutts Jared Leto. My note here says headbutts him with his big head, and so I just want to share that as well. I'll touch on the CGI because they do this weird thing where the vampires like morph into more vampire featured, and so you'll see like the iconic shot of Morbius himself like turning and looking, but his like nose is all messed up, it's pinched up and things like that, and it's sunken in, his eyes are sunken in, his cheeks are very gaunt, like that happens all the time, like when they become hungry. And the CGI here, I don't think it's great at all. Like it's not good. The makeup reminded me of Halloween Town, the Disney Channel original movie, of like, or even like the skeleton character there, because of how sunken in the eyes were and everything. Like it just didn't work at all. There's also just weird writing. I don't know what context this happened because I forgot already, but I have the quote here: "The pretty little stinky pinky." I don't remember when that came from, but I'm pretty sure Morbius said it, and I was very weirded out. By the way, there's also a part where Milo is just enjoying the power that he now has, and he's dancing around and kind of just basking in it. and there's a song playing, and the song I think says "have sex" like repeatedly, just says "have sex," and so I don't know what they're trying to imply. Like I'm sure like this guy with his disorder or whatever like was probably a virgin, and are they trying to imply that he's now going to have sex with a bunch of people, or that's his plan? I don't know, but it was a weird song choice even for the background. Then so they ultimately end up clashing, good versus evil, whole thing. One guy's going out of his mind. The other guy is trying to be a good person, even though he's dealing with this. And so eventually, Michael Morbius, Jared Leto's character, does win. So big surprise. He has to kill Milo, who was his childhood friend. It's all very sad, of course. Meanwhile, Michael's like assistant slash like love interest, girlfriend. I don't know exactly what her role or connection is. Um, she she dies. So she dies. And Michael, who to this point had been resisting drinking any human blood aside from the like five guys he killed immediately, uh, finally gives up and says, you know what, the artificial blood isn't doing it anymore. I'm just going to suck her blood right before he goes into that final battle. So that was really weird. But hey, she does come back to life as a vampire. So apparently he did the vampire kiss sucking blood thing as opposed to the completely draining people of blood and killing them vampire thing. So really weird in general. There's just not a lot that works here. Like his powers were also unclear. And was there a difference between their powers? And if so, why? It seems to be at one point that Michael can fly. He kind of just feels the wind around him and then just takes off in a subway tunnel. And they imply in that moment that Milo can't do that. And so it's like, oh, well, he's got this edge on him because his powers are unique to him. But then they're flying around at the end. Doesn't make any sense. What does seem to be the biggest difference between them is what I would label bat kinesis. Michael seems to have bonded with a horde of vampire bats and can control them, not unlike Aquaman and a school of fish. And that ends up being the difference maker in that fight where he sends a swarm of vampire bats at Milo to help defeat him. Really weird, just weird overall. And then so that's basically the whole story. There's not a lot of substance to it. It's cheesy, it's generic, it's forgettable. It's not good. It's not a good movie. And so, it's Marvel. You want to hang around for the post-credit scene. They hit you with kind of like that little mini one where they give you the stars, the cast, and the director, and then they switch gears into this post-credit scene. And we see Michael Keaton, who everyone saw in like the very early promotional trailers. Michael Keaton as Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, was in the earliest trailers for this movie. I had totally forgotten and not even noticed that he wasn't in the movie to this point. But he shows up in the post-credit scene. He literally just shows up. He pops out of nowhere and he's in a jail cell. And it doesn't make any sense. I think they're trying to tie it to the events of No Way Home, but in No Way Home, people who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man all ended up in the main MCU universe. They didn't just disappear into random places. So that makes no sense whatsoever. And he's sitting in this jail cell. Then they make a whole big to-do about it where it's in the news like, oh, random person shows up in a jail cell named Adrian Toomes. No one knows how he got there. It's weird, and that seemed to be the end of the post-credit scene, right? And so they... I also want to mention the line that he has in this scene. He pops into the jail cell, kind of looks around, and just goes... And Adrian Toomes in Spider-Man Homecoming was just like a real blue-collar guy, right? He was not like the guy who's traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy and is used to weird stuff. No, he's very much a human, just like trash man. And he pops into this other universe in a jail cell and goes, he goes, hope the food's better in this joint. And it's just the weirdest thing because Michael Keaton's weird voice in this moment, and then they cut to all of that chaos. But no, that's not it. They didn't want to just leave it there. They give you an actual then secondary post-credit scene that happens after all of the post-credits. and it shows Michael kind of walking into just like an abandoned, isolated field, and it's like looking around. So it's like he's looking for something or he's waiting to meet someone. And sure enough, in Vulture in his full Vulture suit. And that even leads me more questions because how did his suit get there? His suit doesn't show up when he did. I don't think he wasn't the one who made the suit. Tinkerer made the suit. So I don't think Vulture was capable of making the suit, even if he had the materials, which again, the materials were from the invasion by Loki in the Avengers movie. So that stuff wasn't around for him to build it. I don't understand how he got this suit whatsoever. Well, anyway, he is meeting Morbius and he goes, "Thanks for meeting me, Doc. I've been reading lots about you. Seems to be that a couple of guys like us could team up and do some good." And Michael's like, "I'm listening." And I'm weird. This is super weird because both of them seemed to be more like good guys. Uh through this entire movie, they're trying to paint Morbius as kind of an anti-hero, right? He is a vampire, but he's trying to do good things. Like he is the hero that we are rooting for in this movie. And Vulture, while he was a villain throughout Homecoming, at the very end, like we see him like defending Peter and refusing to give his identity away to Matt Gargan, who would become Scorpion potentially. He doesn't give that information to him. So you kind of think, oh, well, maybe he, turned a leaf. He was relatable as a father and everything too. So I don't know if they're trying to set them up as being like heroes in this universe, like if they're going to do a Sinister Six, but it's like anti-heroes, or if they're just flat out doing the Sinister Six. If they are doing the Sinister Six, it seems weird that they would start with Morbius and Vulture, but I guess that's what they want to do. So as confusing and not good as the movie itself is, the post-credit scenes are even more so. So overall, I did not like this movie. I feel like that's pretty obvious to this point. I I would see it, obviously, even if I knew that I would not like it, I would see it again because I'm curious about the Spider-Man universe and what Marvel and Sony can do with it. But it's just not good. And I would have a hard time recommending it to anyone who has not already seen it. And if you're not a huge Spider-Man fan, or even if you are a huge Spider-Man fan, like it might insult you, to be honest, because it's just not that good. I think the performances are okay. I think some of the casting was interesting. Jared Leto does perfectly fine. I don't have anything. I don't really like Jared Leto to begin with, but I think he does a decent job in this movie. So I can't really complain about that. It's just the writing's awful. Like I said, the story's generic, and the vampire thing just never really works. So huge disappointment in my book. I would probably give this like a 1.5 out of 5 if I were to grade it myself. But I do want to leave this review with a couple of instant reactions that I got from some other members of the audience as I was leaving the theater. Here's a couple of quotes. The first quote here is, "Bro, I'd rather watch Green Lantern." And the other one is, "It was a Bella moment from Twilight." And so clearly they're talking about when Michael's girlfriend or whatever comes back as a vampire. But I just thought those were hilarious quotes. And so I jotted those down after I heard those and I was leaving the theater. So if you're thinking about going to see Morbius, if you're excited about it, either really curb those expectations or just don't do it. Wait until it pops up on, I think Sony has a deal with Stars. I don't know. You can watch it, rent it from Redbox, something like that. It's probably a better investment of your time and money overall. So that's it. That's my thoughts on Morbius. Hopefully things get better. Sony had instilled a lot of goodwill with their recent moves. I'm talking specifically like the Venom movies and then also their role in No Way Home. So I was hoping that this would turn out better. It didn't, unfortunately. So we'll see where things go from here. I think Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse is the name of the sequel, is going to be the next offering from that team, or the Sony Marvel Spider-Man universe or realm there. And so I have high hopes for that. But Morbius was a huge disappointment. Well, that's it for today's review. Thank you so much for listening. I would definitely appreciate it. I just want to give you a reminder, episode 204 is available now. Um, I talked about the top 5 characters that deserve to be in live action with a couple of my buddies from my times in Omaha, including Infernal Griffin, who is making his return to the show. That's a great conversation. If you are really excited about the idea of more Spider-Man characters making it onto the big screen, definitely want to direct you to that. We also are going to be having some more reviews, obviously every Monday, so be sure to follow the show, subscribe, all of that to make sure that you're not missing it. You can also follow us on social media. All of our social media links are going to be in the description. So thank you so much for checking out this review. We'll see you next time.